managers and all, who talk to them in the morning on the morning call and set the things in terms of what are the things which they need to do. And also in the night we have a WhatsApp, so there some communication kind of a thing where everyone mention like what are the work which they did on that day in terms of I finished these many things, these are the things, so that it communicated across in the everyone in the group. Suppose if someone is not posting, obviously then he knows ki okay, I haven't done something while others are doing, so it keeps them motivated as well. Okay, they are posting something, so I also need to post something. So that's why they'll start working on, which is obviously trackable and all. So that's one simple way what we see in terms of to make everyone do some work.
All right. All right. Okay. So, Ruchir, my next question is to you, and taking a cue from what both Nakul and Raghu mentioned. I mean, you are into telecom. Now is the time when you would be flooded. In fact, I think I'm sure the technology team and a lot of other teams in Vodafone must be. I mean, I'm sure you must be having far more deliverables today compared to what it used to be earlier. What kind of stress points and as we spoke about productivity, how do you all take care of that in a situation like this, and especially with the workforce, with the number of workforce that you have? How do you all how have you all gone about it?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Bhakti?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, Bhakti, thank you for having me here. I think it's a good opportunity for me to share my experiences with the larger group. And if that can help the community in some or the other way, I think it'll be great. Coming back to the question that you asked, I'd like to actually take a step back and look at telecom as an industry, looking at the involvement that customers have with the product. Okay, so the pressure was always there on this industry. Not that these times are kind of putting that additional pressure on this industry. However, what we've realized is that while work from home is something which is relatively new, especially in this part of the world, not everyone is accustomed to work from home. However, when people are working from home, we also need to realize that they are also working for home. So it's not just working from home, it's also working for home. And that's something that we started realizing. It's very interesting because we have to keep a balance in also ensuring and being real to the fact that people or employees are required to kind of look after family responsibilities too while they're at home. But going back to what Nakul and Raghu were mentioning, I think in times like these, one of the other things that we've been doing is also start looking at our ways of working, right? So we've taken a very, very close look at our ways of working. Obviously, when you work from home, there are, certain ways that you have to change. We've huddled up, we've created those policies, we've created those processes, we've rolled it out. We've ensured that employees are communicated well enough. And more importantly, people who have to be on field, right? Especially because if you have to ensure the upkeep of the network, you have to have a lot of field engineers out there in the field, ensuring that the sites are up and running. It's important for us as an organization to give them a bigger sense of purpose, especially in times like these, right? And I think one of the other panel members also spoke about the fact that most of them are blue collar workers. However, what we've realized is that whether you are white collared or blue collared, if you are able to give your employees a certain sense of purpose beyond what they are doing, I think that kind of augurs well for them, right? So that's something that we've been doing. We've created platforms to recognize and appreciate the work that our network engineers are doing. Not all appreciation or rewards would be in cash. A lot of them can be in kind as well, but it's important. It's important to keep them together. So that those are a few things that we've been doing.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, Richard. So while we speak about productivity and I get it, right? I mean, you're huddling up, creating these small, short guidelines, creating policies. I think while we feel these are very small steps, but I think they go a long way. Even simple things like, how do you ensure that, you're sitting at home and how do you integrate? I mean, it's no more work-life balance. It is work-life integration to what you were saying just now. So, and again, in the midst of all of this, how do you ensure that the employee experience is also, managed? And to that, Neha, with the experience that you've been working, you've worked in larger organizations, you're also talking to, you're also consulting and coaching leaders. What according to you, in times like these, when you're still figuring out how do you ensure that the operations go smooth, and while the operations go smooth in the capacity that I'm working, I also want the maximum productivity, and at the same time, some of while you're working from home and for home, how do you ensure that the employee experience does not dip? What do you what are your views on this?
Thanks, Bhakti. I think before I answer your question in a very pinpointed way, I think I'll just take a minute or so and kind of bring in a perspective in terms of how we are in a very unique situation today. So in my career life cycle, this is the third time that I am actually witnessing economic kind of shutdown or a downturn. Earlier, I think some of my colleagues would recollect, it was the year was 2001, 2002 when we had the first dot-com related crisis, and then subsequently 2009 when I think largely there was a global recession, but it did not pan out to that extent in India. And now in 2020, right at the onset of this year, we have been hit by this COVID-19 crisis. I would first of all like to share that, having gone through those kind of situations, and yes, there is a lot of panic, there's a lot of uncertainty, and everybody seems to be, talking about the crisis and the ways to handle the crisis and things like that. I think from the mental perspective, it is very, very important for each one of us, whether we are founders or we are leadership team, or we are even managing the show at any of the startups or mature organizations, to sort of buy into the fact and be very, very positive and say that this phase is going to pass. It's not something which we are struck with, and therefore we should sort of give in at this point in time. And I think once you are on that mental path of in a way, like the Prime Minister has appealed, it's like a war kind of situation, and we got to have that inner strength to bring out when we are fighting it like a war-like situation. Earlier times, of course, things were very different. This time we've been struck by a health crisis alongside the shutdown. I think one very, very positive side of today's crisis, I would say, is that the technology is with us. The last two situations, we didn't have so much of virtual connectivity, ability to work from home, having social interactions on various social platforms, etc., was absolutely not there. And in that, I think lies an opportunity. There lies a sort of learning perspective, a sense that we can continue in terms of work. Of course, in terms of the crisis, we would broadly, I think, each one has now sort of, figured out how this crisis is going to pan out. And clearly, even at the country level or at a corporate level, there is a segregation between essential and non-essential sort of work zones. When it comes to essential, and I think, as the other panelists said, there is a spike, and it's a good problem to deal with in terms of, we spoke about 3x growth suddenly spiking. We don't, have that kind of situation coming in. While for others, it's a very different kind of, situation to handle, where they're restricted and not able to function at this point in time. So again, now coming back to your question, I would say the key would be to keep yourself engaged into what one could possibly do in the given situation. And there are a whole host of frameworks as an entrepreneur, as somebody who is a part of the founding team of the startups can look in terms of how do I help my team members to get over the fears. What kind of fears are actually playing on their mind? Are the fears are in terms of losing their jobs or their health situation, getting contracted by the virus? Do they feel safe enough from the health standpoint, or are there any other familial responsibilities which are causing the fear? So to identify the source of fear is, I would say, as the first step. And it would be a great thing to actually do that reflective exercise, and in very clear terms put down what are the aspects which are hitting you in terms of fear. It could be your cash crisis, not reaching out to customers, not able to connect with employees, whatever it is. So I think, to sum it up, taking cognizance of the fact that yes, we are here in this crisis, we will get over it. It's just a matter of a few weeks or perhaps a couple of months, 3 months. And in that situation, how do I stay on the top of this crisis? What are specific things that I need to do to get rid of the fear factor, from which all different dimensions this fear is going to hit me, and how do I mitigate those fears?
All right. Thanks, Neha. So, Nakul, you mentioned that most of your teams right now is not operational, right? And taking and fear, right? And that is something that is worrying. I mean, it's everybody's worried about what does the future hold for me? What does this mean to me professionally? What are the steps that you have taken to address fear of your employees? And what are the kind of fears? Are people coming up to you very candidly and having a chat with you about it? Or are you going and talking to them? I mean, how is it at Cashify?
I think so. Very early on, I think around 20th March onwards only, what we started doing was uh, just a second. Yeah, this
No
is what
problem.
happens. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Like
It's
I said,
okay.
you're also working for home.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Yeah. We started on 20th, from 20th March onward, we started educating a lot of our blue workers, right? I think a lot of them are dependent on information through us and the right information. So we started having a lot of town halls, which were not physical town halls, but town halls through Zoom. And where the specific agenda was trying to educate them that what is this all about, why do they need to sanitize, why do they need to be careful, and what are we doing as a company for them, and what are the options available for them. For example, simple things like that, hey, your insurance covers coronavirus kind of issues, right? That, hey, what do you need to do at home to prevent further spread? What are the kind of symptoms available, and those kind of small things. And now when the teams are offline, what we do is try to, through their team leads, have daily calls. We are doing a lot of training programs for them, so that we are able to engage them and make sure their minds are distracted and not focused on worrying about what's happening in the world. Always keeping them updated of what are the company, what are the company plans, because there is a set of people, which is the tech team, the data team, which is continuously working. So we are also, for example, using the ops team to do a lot of data scraping activities, who have access to laptops, so that we could utilize some of their time and make sure that they feel they're contributing to the team.
So okay, so you I think the gist of what you just said, it talks about having constant and transparent communication, keeping them engaged, utilizing this time to develop them. I just had a small question. You said you guys had Zoom town halls, and you also have a lot of blue collared you also have a lot of blue collared employees. Was Zoom something new for them, or was it a part of your daily activity?
No, so it was not there earlier, but I think everybody uses a mobile phone right now,
Okay.
and because Zoom is available on a mobile phone,
Mhm.
it's not really hard for them to adapt to it. And because all of us are in a, so we call ourselves a phone company, so most of us know how to operate and use a phone. So
Okay.
that was not a challenge.
Okay, okay, all right. So Raghu, coming to you, for your teams that I mean, and if you to talk about fear, right? And you pointed it out that it definitely impacts people's motivation because why am I coming and why I'm doing the same. I'm working and my colleague is not working, and what is it in for me? How do you handle those questions? How do you handle and keep them? What are the things that they look forward to?
Yeah, so basically, when we had this discussion before,
Mhm.
even before the rollout as well, when we are having this Janta curfew and all, when
Mhm.
we have the team here, the discussion what we had is a bigger purpose. In terms of the first thing is obviously everyone want the company to work on and generate some cash rather than like sitting at home. So the good thing is all the employees want to contribute. So that's what we felt is that's a good thing, obviously. So some of the guys will be able to come to office because of their proximity and all, and some will not be able to come, but then how can they also contribute by available on the phone and coordinating some of the activities in the operations through phone and all. So that also they can do, but the guys who are coming in is actually doing a lot of thing in terms of, because one thing is the bigger purpose in terms of about the company need to continue the operation. So that's how in terms of obviously we need your support for that is what the discussion what we had with them. And obviously for working in terms of how we can ensure your safety is the first thing, in terms of by doing like a lot of measures which we already know in terms of all the following all the protocols is the first thing, so that you will be safe by working, and also then arranging for their transportation in terms of pickup and drop, so that they don't have any scare on that. And also then the third thing is also like I mentioned, like arranging for food, transport and all those things. And on the top of that also we discussed about some incentive plans kind of a thing, so that as you're working and some others are not able to work or something, so because you are working in this crisis situation and also helping the company to generate some cash flow, so we discuss some incentive plan with them, like they'll be getting some part of the salary as a special incentive kind of a thing because of working during this duration. But obviously at this stage money is not the biggest motivator for all the guys is what we see, unless they are aligned to the company's vision and what are the work they are doing, they enjoy it. Obviously they don't want to risk in this kind of a situation, but that's a token of appreciation kind of a thing what we want to give them through the incentive. But the bigger motivation what I felt is in terms of alignment to the company's vision and goals is what is more important. If they don't have them, then obviously nothing can work out to make them work.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Raghu. So yeah, I mean, and something that I hear all of you saying, and this has come out in different forms or in some form or the other, that at the end of the day, I think while yes, money is important for all of us, I think alignment, even people sharing the same passion that you guys do, working towards the company, I think that is what really makes a difference. We keep, I mean, in this scenario, right? One thing is that yes, I really want to work. I really want to do my best to ensure that I contribute to my organization. I want to do my best as a founder to ensure that I sustain myself. There would also be, I mean, depending on how things shape up, how long this impacts us economically, financially. Uh, there would be times when we might even have to, I mean, we could sustain ourselves for a while, but then also there are times when the picture would be not so positive one, right? We might have to take certain tough calls depending on how things shape up. So when I say, I mean, the idea is for everybody to be aligned, but how do you have these tough conversations? How do you ensure that yes, I mean, right now we've hit this, we're doing our best, but what happens if things don't work out? And Richard, this is where I wanted to request you to share your views about how do you think people and how do you think business leaders should handle and should be prepared for handling situations like these?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very important point that you've raised, Bhakti. And look, let's face it, the problem is real, right? Recession is here. With or without the lockdown, situations will not get back to normal very soon, right? It will take months, quarters, for things to kind of be back on track. Uh, if I were to look at this from an entrepreneur point of view, right, I think they have an added responsibility, because while they are also supposed to be ensuring that the company that they are running sustains itself, but at the same time they're also responsible towards their employees and their families. But having said that, there are times when one has to bite the bullet, right? As an entrepreneur, in case of uh, I'm pushed to a situation where I genuinely do not have the required funds to run the company, I will have to make a hard call. And when I have to make a hard call, obviously, it will have to happen in a certain manner. So, to all the entrepreneurs who are listening to this, in case of there is a need for you to ensure that the business sustains itself, there could be situations where you may have to ask your employees to go. However, when we say that you have to ask your employees to go, it's important for us to realize how do we do it and who do we part ways with, right? Uh, this is the time when you have to be absolutely clear of who your critical resources are, who are the ones that you would want to proactively ring fence, right? There can be various processes, various data that you may want to look at, but it's very important for you to identify who your critical resources are. The other thing that that a lot of people have come to me and spoken to me about is that, when they have to have that conversation with an individual, they actually go numb. Look, one doesn't have to be apologetic about the fact that we have to lay off. I mean, the fact is, it's always good as an entrepreneur, in case if I'm responsible for, let's say, 50 employees, it's important that if I can sustain my business and have 40 of them, on my rolls, and if 40 of them can continue to be employed at the cost of the balance 10, then I will have to take that hard decision. And take that hard decision, not only because of the fact that, those 40 people and I'll have to run my business. At the end of the day, I'm in the business of making profits. Even if I have to do charity, I will need funds to be able to do that. And hence, it's important that I take that hard call. One doesn't have to be apologetic about the fact that I will have to lay off. But yes, a very fair, transparent, and a respectful conversation is something that is as an absolute must, right? If people have to be exited, so be it. But those conversations have to be absolutely respectful. Obviously, as an individual, as a company, as an entrepreneur, I may want to go beyond what the law prescribes in terms of ensuring that there is enough that I'm able to do for the employee who I'm asking to go. However, that's something which is important. If you have to make those conversations, this is the time where you have to decide. This is the time where you have to make your strategies and ensure that you're able to identify your critical resources.
Thanks, Richard. I think what is also very important here to take a call on is to know that's the stage that you've reached. There are multiple things that companies and organizations have done in the past to ensure that everybody shares responsibility collectively. And I know for a fact, I mean, I was speaking to Raghu, and Raghu, can I request you to share something that you've done at SuperZorb and the way you handle these conversations with your teams with respect to the incentives, with respect to the salaries, with respect to the fears that they had, and perhaps you could just share your experience as to how did it go about and how did you guys go about handling that.
Yeah, so as you like, this is a tough situation. So we get like a lot of things from because we anyway promote the open culture kind of a thing. So a lot of people come to us, and then there's a discussion in terms of what's going to happen to the company. So that's a bigger thing, whether we'll be able to survive this storm or something. So the thing is, like, this became like a thriller movie. No one knows what is the climax kind of a thing. So what the impact, we all don't know. That's what we said. Like, we don't know where it's going to end. But the thing is, at least for the month of March and April, April, what we assured them is we are not going to do any layoffs, because this is going to be a very tough situation. So if we fire some people, it gets very difficult for them to find other jobs as well in this situation. So that's what the call we took. But for that, to do that, because we are operating only at a limited capacity and we are a startup, don't have a lot of cash reserves or unlimited resources. So we said definitely there should be a salary cut is what we all should be ready for, because obviously everyone need to minimize the expenses in this tougher time. So that's why we need to go for a salary cut is what we discussed. But there also what we did is in terms of it flows from the top, like being us in the front kind of a thing. What we said is like at the top we'll be taking a 2x cut compared to people who are at the lower level. So if you take a 2x percentage of cut on the salary is what, even at the founder level and also at the senior management level, we all will take a 2x cut, while there'll be a X percentage cut for the other people for the month of March and April. And if the future looks bright and we get like a lot of profits in the future, obviously we'll pay this money back to you within 6 months or 1 year, but we'll hold back this salary for these 2 months is what we discussed with these people.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Raghu, for sharing that. How does so Neha, coming and this is a question for you. What do you think, as a responsible leader, as a responsible founder, as a responsible entrepreneur, what is it that I must do at this point in time of as far as my people strategy is concerned? How does it change my people strategy, and what are some things that I must ensure that I do, and things that I should not do? And perhaps suppose this will open it up for some question and answers. So yeah.
So I would like to share in a few of my experiences where I have been, coaching the founders in terms of they have been exactly struck with this kind of dilemma. And when we brainstormed, one of the innovative solution, and perhaps some of the smaller startups can take it back and think through in their teams. What happens is each one has got a particular sustenance capacity, in the sense that if I have to run my household, I know how much I can sort of take in terms of a pay cut. So rather than making it an imposed decision by the founder, in a couple of teams, what we have practiced is we have had a frank conversation with the teammates, and we've asked each one to sort of look at what kind of pay cut one can take for a couple of months, whether it is 30%, 35%, and in some cases up to 50%. And more democratically and through discussions, we have come to this sort of a people strategy when it comes to the core team and the next level teammates to look at their own scenario, and then signing up for a pay cut. Some of the other methods which we've also looked at, of course, is leave which is with half pay, leave which is without pay till the operations are back to normalcy, and it may take about a month or two or a few more weeks than that. And coming from the talent perspective at this point in time, the founders are again redoing their talent calibration in terms of who are the absolute mission critical people. When you're letting go of people, we are also looking at when we are getting over this phase, and when we have to bounce back, and when there is this unmet demand, or I would say pent up demand, which may sort of surface maybe a quarter down the line. How do we take care of that, and who are the kind of people who are going to sort of bring in those sales deals or things like that, bringing customers, which will help us to sort of revive and get back once this phase is over. So I think these are some of the considerations a founding member should look at when specifically you're looking at taking very tough calls with your people strategy.
Okay. Okay.
So, Bhakti, sorry, Ruchir,
Sure.
if I may just add one small point. I heard, a lot of my co-panelists speak about, taking pay cuts and all of that. While obviously these are, right things to do. And obviously every organization or a startup will have to decide what is it that they want to do as a part of their strategy. However, there is also a double-edged sword, right? So, for example, when you try and have a one-size-fits-all approach, we need to realize that even in our teams, there will be people who will be at varied levels of performance and potential. People who are high on performance, high on potential, may not be too comfortable getting treated exactly in a manner in which everyone else also is getting treated, right? So one has to be very, very mindful of this fact, and then go ahead and form their strategy.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree. And this is as I mean, and that's exactly what even I tried. I was trying to point out at that while yes, some companies may decide to go through pay cuts, some companies may decide that this is the time that perhaps I cannot sustain any further and I may have to look at certain layoffs. Again, there would also be companies that may have enough runway and then they decide that, as Nakul mentioned, as Raghu mentioned, that, they would utilize this time to build their teams up, because that is also the other side of it, right? So
True.
please, you need to really look at how you are doing as a business, look at where do you stand today, and then take a call as to what is it that you need to do with respect to your strategy.
Yeah. So
Because
just one small thing, since you mentioned about building capabilities during this time. I think from a framework point of view, it makes a lot of sense to have a combination of build, buy, and borrow, right? There will be a lot of skill sets that you may not employ people with, but you can ask them to work for you on a contractual basis, as maybe as contractual uh, obligations, so on and so forth. But build, buy, borrow, that's the model that one can follow.
Sure, that's an interesting point. Yes, absolutely, and that's the call that you guys will take as entrepreneurs. And in the interest of time, I think we will now take on questions, and we already have a few questions from our audiences here. And the first question is there any model or suggestion if you guys have figured out for pay cut or paying later, which can generally be used by startups overall? Well, I guess I would let me just answer that first. And of course, you guys can add on to it as well. As I just mentioned, there is no model around pay cuts. It's a very individual, a very business specific thing. Please have a look at your runway. Please have a look at how you are doing. How is the health of your organization doing? When we talk about these tough calls, the idea was to discuss that, these are realities and they need to be faced, and how do you face it with extreme transparency, with extreme vulnerability, is what we're trying to say here. Doesn't mean that is the only way out in the current situation. So yeah, and okay, so I think the question that you're trying to ask is, and from what I get from the messages, is that is there a 30%, 20%, 10%? How do you decide on that number? So I don't think there's a mathematical formula to it. I think it totally depends. But again, I would maybe perhaps request Raghu. Raghu, you already have rolled that out at SuperZop, and I think partly you did cover it. But perhaps if you just want to reiterate a bit in terms of how did you arrive at how much would a leadership team take a pay cut on, and how much layer, and so on and so forth.
So basically our thought process has been that obviously we have a particular amount of cash and we know, like, we plan for a particular thing of burn. Like suppose we have suppose 10 crores of cash available, and we know like every month we are going to burn 2 crores of rupees. So it means like you have a 5 months of runway. And also, as the situation currently is, like, to raise the next round of funding is also definitely, I think everyone should expect to be get delayed by at least like 4-5 months from whatever your plans are. So at least you should be able to maintain that kind of a runway. So to maintain that kind of a runway, obviously you need to preserve some kind of cash. So the formula comes out of that in terms of what kind of burn is what you can take without impacting your runway, at least whatever you can save currently, whatever you have. So that's what we did in terms of we are operating at a particular level of business and we are generating this much of cash. But while all your fixed costs are going to remain, whether you're running or not running, your rents, manpower cost, all these things are going to be remain. So for that, then in terms of if you're operating at this capacity and you're generating only this much of amount, while earlier you are generating a lot more. So then to balance out that, the option what you have is in terms of only the manpower or negotiating with your owner for the rent or something. So we explore like all the options what we can do so that we don't cross our limit what we put for the burn, because otherwise if your runway gets impacted, obviously then it's going to be a bigger problem for the entire company. So it's better for you to keep your burn within the limits what you planned. So for that, based on that, we derived in terms of this is the percentage what we have to look at. And also at the same time, obviously it should not impact the people. Suppose if you have employees who are drawing like a 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs per month, might be the cut can be higher for them, because for them like it will not be so much of impactful for their daily running and everything. So that's how in terms of we have some lower level of employees who might be doing like 15k 20k kind of a thing. For them we put the cut to the minimal so that they'll be able to run their homes and there is no challenge for them to do that. So that's what has been our strategies.
Okay. Thanks, Raghu. The next question, and perhaps Nakul, if you, I would like to ask you this: that in this time of crisis, what are the areas of great opportunity a startup can take advantage of, not in terms of surviving but growing?
Yeah, so I don't really have actual things to say about growing, but obviously there are a lot of areas of improvement. For example, we are using this time to develop a lot more internal products, which we want to use when we get back in the market. Also, for example, we wanted to change our ERP system internally for the longest time, and couldn't because we didn't have enough time or manpower training. And so we have said that, hey, this is a great opportunity for us. And so we are now just rolled up ERP implementation for next 15 days. And we are doing trainings. And the whole idea is that when the lockdown finishes, 15th April, we go live with the new ERP. So we're using this time to improve ourselves, to train people better, so that when we come out, we hit the ground running, because we also expect that the consumption will increase during this time.
Okay, thanks, Nakul. And I think, yes, I mean, when you come back, and that's my next question. A question from our audience. How can startups manage their people once they're back to normal? Any suggestion to be prepared? And this is an important point, which I think we must be prepared for. Ruchir, would you like to go first? And I would like to hear some more perspectives on this as well. What do you suggest?
Sure. Can you repeat the question, please?
How can startups manage their people once things are back to normal? Any suggestions to be prepared once they're back to normal?
No, I think, rather than saying how would startups prepare people once they are back to normal, I think it's important for us to prepare them right now, considering that this is normal. And the reason why I say this is because I think this is also an opportunity for us to realize of what is it that can change from a way of working point of view, right? The world is increasingly going to go the digital way, right? So this is the time when you actually have to prepare your strategies and prepare for the months to come. So like I said, your talent strategy in terms of, what is it that you would want to buy, which are the skill sets that you can build, which are the skill sets that you can borrow. This is exactly what you need to do. And again, in terms of, ensuring that the existing employees are engaged, it's important for us to continue to reach out to them. One of the things that everyone mentioned, is, they are in constant touch with them. I think one more thing that can be done, and this is where you touch the emotional chord of people as well, is also to reach out to their families. Right? Families play a very important role in everyone's life. So reach out to their families. But again, like I said, this is the time where you have to prepare for the time to come. You have to establish new ways of working. You have to constantly engage with your employees, set up processes, help them understand the new ways of working, so that when the lockdown is over immediately, the rubber can hit the road as soon as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Neha, you've been talking to a lot of leaders and you've been coaching them. What do you think are they doing in this time that we have at hand? And as Richard mentioned, are they working on building their teams up? And what is the approach that they are taking? What's your view on what's happening out there?
So I think particularly in the month of April, where we know that there is a lot of time at hand, most of the companies where they are into the non-essential kind of operations, typically after doing the math, that they've figured out that every day there would be at least 2.5 to 3 hours of free time the employees would have. After doing their regular course of work and emails and stuff like that, which they can productively engage into a very specific learning activities based on their own needs. So I think what has happened is, looking at the zone of learning opportunities, most of the companies have launched focused learning initiatives for the month of April. Typically second half of the day or 2 to 3 hours, people are asked to devote to their own learning agenda. Most of us have some sort of learning plan for the year, etc., and that's kind of there, either consolidated or somewhere at the back of their mind. So they've pulled that in front, started looking at online courses, started looking at team learning initiatives, which could be through web-based platform, people learning together. A lot of I would say free courses or courses are available at a very steep discount on various learning portals. So all those opportunities are being leveraged by the organizations in this 1 month specifically, so that you get around 100 plus learning hours, which typically people can clock in because they're not spending time in commuting, they're not, the workload is not high, and when you are learning some new things, your mind gets occupied, you have that zeal and positivity instilled into your employee. So that's what is happening in a big way when it comes to the zone of learning. So and then also at the same time, people are preparing for the next phase of growth, when as you said, the business, when it comes back to normalcy, it may come back limping, and may not be in a in one go, but that's the time when people are really looking at how which all capabilities we need to build with the existing people, and how do we sort of get the mileage out of that in terms
Absolutely.
of
Also,
growth aspects.
also very quickly, just about 20-30 seconds. See, it's also important for organizations to look at, and I've been saying this, all along, but I'm reiterating this, is to look at new ways of working. Now, for example, if a typical salesperson in the organization is used to travel a certain location or a certain beat as a part of his sales routine, how is it that he's ensuring that he's able to connect to those distributors, those retailers virtually? Is something that needs to, and I'm giving this as an example, is something which needs to go back into your way of working. How can you quickly change your governance mechanism from checking who are the people that he's covered in terms of speaking, virtually connecting, so on and so forth, instead of physically going there? Am I able to kind of reach out to 50 people in a span of 1 hour, as opposed to maybe 2 hours that I was taking earlier? So that's how you kind of look at new ways of working, and also ensure that you are able to improve productivity wherever you can.
Also, a lot of content is being prepared. So for example, if you had, let's say, induction modules, etc., which typically are run when employees join the organization in person, so a lot of them are using that time to convert that into digital content, which can be shared by way
Absolutely.
of all of that, so that I mean, just sort of I would say
Correct.
of the point that Ruchir was making.
Sure. I will take this one last question, and that has come from. Just give me 1 second, and I would like the founders to answer that. How long do you think this crisis is going to last? Well, a question that all of us need answers to, and also from an early stage startup standpoint, which does not have a lot of cash. What would you recommend? Letting go of the team members or slashing salaries across the board? Actually, I think part of it is already answered in our earlier this thing. So perhaps uh, I would just perhaps just skip that question. My bad. I thought I just misread it. And then perhaps we'll go to another question which says that um, how do you judge the efficiency of your team, especially when they're young and not used to working from home? Perhaps I think, again, we've all been talking about the newer ways of working, putting in processes. Sometimes all it takes is simple processes. You don't have access to fancy tools, no problem. Can you create a process of connecting, twice a day, thrice a day, over Google, over calls? Can you put a process in place which may require a little bit of micromanagement? But it's all about putting up processes and systems at this point in time. And while you put this question up, that you have a younger team, also remember that's a plus, because younger folks are also very easy to adapt to newer things and they are very tech savvy. So I think that is one answer that is something that I would recommend. One last question that I wanted to put out to Raghu and Nakul, and was that perhaps we could just quickly wrap up the conversation, is what is that one thing that you all think you all had done, that you all wish you all had done earlier, which would have perhaps helped you be in a better position today? And either of you could go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think the biggest challenge from my perspective, at least what I saw, is not enabling or checking in terms of the work from home options earlier, kind of a thing. At least we did that for the technology team, but now after this crisis, we realized that many of the other guys also can work from home. Might be at least like 3 or 4 days a week also. But then in terms of, we need to set up some kind of ecosystem for that in terms of their connectivity, the desktops, laptops, whatever we can provide them, and also the processes to follow. That might be some of the softwares as well, so that we all can be able to do chat and have like more productivity when we are there. Maybe that's a learning for us in terms of how we can be prepared for the worst, in terms of because we have like a lot of operational kind of people here in terms of, so but still we now realize that we can also make them also work from home by giving them access and everything. That's still possible is what we realized, at least, but we couldn't prepare for that. So might be if we get at least a bit of release on the lockdown, we want to have that prepared first, so that we don't know if you're going to get another lockdown, at least we'll be ready for that.
Okay, Nakul?
True.
Yeah, I can't think of any. Yeah, so whoever we could get work from home done is doing that. And you guys talked about efficiency. I am still struggling with that. I think our efficiencies have gone down. It may have, in the first week they were great, but now as more and more time is being spent at home, I think the efficiencies are going down, and I don't have a solution to improve that. But yeah, we are just hoping that the lockdown does not extend and we are back in the field by 15th April.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Nakul. So, all right. It was, I think we touched upon various aspects of what is it that it takes for us to, sustain ourselves and even grow, possibly with respect to people strategy. I think we touched upon the regular operations, but I think the few themes that clearly come out, and after hearing all of you speak, is I think it absolutely depends on how quickly and how swiftly are you able to adapt, or are you able to think that yes, this is the new reality, and I need to do my best in what I have right now. How do you address things that are in your control? How do you address things that are not in your control? How do you take those tough calls, those tough decisions? And of course, at the same time, while you're juggling with all of this, how do you even manage your employees' morale, your experiences, some of the things that you guys mentioned, that being empathetic towards them, right? That while yes, you're working from home, you're also working for home. You reach out to their families, addressing their fears. Some of you have done it very well. By having those clear, transparent communication with your team members. And I think all of this, right? I mean, there is no one solution to the problem that we have at hand right now. I think, and as an organization, even CICO, while we speak to other startups, while we deal with our own teams, in fact, simple things, right? Having a 3 everyday catch-up calls, wherein we're not talking about anything to do with work. We just catch up to understand what are you doing, how are you doing, what did you eat for dinner, what did you have for lunch. And those conversations, those e-chai conversations, e-coffee conversations make a lot of difference, right? Because it's like a sort of a virtual office. You want to be able to see your folks. You want that assurance that yes, we're all in it together and we're all struggling, but we're all trying our best. I think at the end of the day, that is what really matters. Give it your best, try and be adaptive to what the new normals look like, and then work your way around it. As I think as founders, as leaders, it is important for us to be clear in our heads as far as this is concerned, and ensure that we communicate with our teams as much as we can, and ensure that we don't lose their pulse. We are absolutely on top of our on understanding of what the pulse of the organization looks like, even in times like these. So it was a very, very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much, each one of you. Thank you to all the panelists, to all the audiences. And thank you for this amazing, fruitful discussion.
Bhakti, can I just add something before?
Absolutely, absolutely, please.
I think one thing I wanted to emphasize was that for us, it was the second time this kind of thing happened. The first one was demonetization, and we were clearly not prepared at that time. And hence, the impact has been very less to us, because I think we were more mentally prepared this time. Because so in demonetization, it affected our industry much more, because we were called Cashify and there was no cash to give, which was very ironical at those months. But it took us 2 months to actually start reacting to the market, figuring it out, and 2 months was very late. So what my advice, and so in February we had to lay off 50% of our employees, because we were not able to take some actions in November, December, January, which we should have done to save maybe at least, if not 50% layoff, we could have prevented at least 30% of them. And the silver lining in that was that we were able to hire 25% of them back in June again, and they came back because we were very transparent on why we were laying them off, what was happening, what was the situation. So my advice to all young entrepreneurs or young startups is just that hang in there. There's no right and wrong answer. Just over communicate with your teams, be transparent, be honest about it. I don't think they expect you to know the right answers, but if you are honest and transparent with them, you will always have their trust, and then do what's right for the organization and the people.
Absolutely, absolutely, and trust is something that I think that is an important point, which I think we did touch upon, but in some way or the other. But I think at the end of the day, it is a matter of trust, and I absolutely agree with you on that, Nakul. That when you have trust of your folks, they will stand with you in the toughest of the times. Whether you make through it or you don't. So that is what people strategy is all about. Do things with absolute honesty, with transparency, be clear in your heads. And I think that is what takes us a long way as entrepreneurs, as business leaders. And so thank you everyone again for all your time, and please keep looking out. We will be having a series of these webinars wherein with every webinar we'll touch upon different topics. This time it was people strategy. You will soon hear from us on the next webinars, and stay tuned in. Thank you again. Thank you everyone. Have a good evening.